Good morning. This is Fran. I haven't done one of these in a while, so please be patient with me, especially since my voice has been damaged by a recent bout with bronchitis. I write science fiction. Some of you already know that. I write science fiction to explore alternatives, things that are not but could be, at least in my imagination, and that might have some bearing on the way people live and think today. I'm not the only such, of course. There are many science fiction writers, many that are far more popular than I. One that I admire greatly, who passed away some time ago, was Poul Anderson. He wrote for many years, produced a great deal of material, much of it brilliant, and his imagination ranged more widely than most other practitioners in the field, which gave him a special place among those I admire. In 1968, Anderson wrote a story titled "A Man to My Wounding." In that story, he gave us a vision of a new world, actually Earth, but a very different sort of place, in which war had been replaced by a system of international assassins. Now, Anderson wasn't the first to imagine that war might be displaced by some other system. James Blish, who also passed away some time ago, imagined that it could be replaced by a scheme of traitors. And if you'd like to read about that, his story, A Style in Treason, is available in many places. Anyway, as often is the case in science fictional tales, the writer will use an inserted passage of backstory, often delivered by a supposed expert, to explain why things are happening as they are. I would like to read you that passage now because I feel it has great explanatory power for what we've been going through lately. Please forgive me for looking away from the camera because I can't do that and read this at the same time. The development was inevitable toward greater and greater ferocity. For example, we think of the era between the Peace of Westphalia and the French Revolution as one of limited conflicts. But Heidelberg and Poltava suffice to remind us how easily they got out of hand. Likewise, the relative chivalry of the post-Napoleonic 19th century evolved into the trench combat of the First World War, the indiscriminate aerial bombings of the Second, and the atomic horrors of the Third. The Third World War, short and inconclusive as it was, made painfully clear that mass destruction had become ridiculous. War was traditionally an instrument of national policy, a means of getting acquiescence to something from another state when less drastic measures had failed. But a threat to instigate mutual suicide has no such meaning. At the same time, force remains the ultimate standard. It is no use to preach that killing is wrong, that human life is infinitely valuable, and so on. I'm afraid that in point of blunt, regrettable fact, human life has always been a rather cheap commodity. From a man defending his wife against a homicidal maniac on to the most complex international problems, issues are bound to arise occasionally which cannot be resolved. If these issues are too important to ignore, men will fight. The needs of the world today is, therefore, not to plan grandiose renunciations of violence. I know that many distinguished thinkers regard our present system of killing, not whole populations, but the leaders of those populations, as a step forward. Certainly it is more efficient, even more humane, than war, but it does not lead logically to a next step of killing no one at all. Rather, it has merely shifted the means of enforcing national will. Our task is to understand this process. That will not be easy. Assassination evolved slowly, almost unconsciously, like every other viable institution. Like old-fashioned war, it has its own reaction upon the political purposes for which it is used. Also like war, it has its own evolutionary tendencies. Once we thought we had contained war, made it a safely limited duel between gentlemen. We learned better. Let us not make the same complacent mistake about our new system of assassination. That was a professor type in the story A Man to My Wounding by Poole Anderson. Now, he was concerned with wars between nations. And yes, that's a very important subject. But let's think a little bit about the kind of quiet civil war that's currently raging in the United States of America. One of our political families is slowly making the decision that since it cannot win its argument with us, it will use force. That, of course, is the recourse of anyone who cannot argue successfully. He'll try to silence his opponent. We have had many, many death threats labeled at figures on the right. We've had a minimum of 2 visible assassination attempts against Donald Trump, who is now the president. There may be more. And of course, just a few days ago, we had the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This is food for thought. This is something to ponder because I can think of no limiting principle by which this sort of conflict can be corralled. I think we're going to see more of it. I think it's going to get more vicious. I think it's going to widen its scope such that people who have very minor voices, maybe even as minor as mine, will be targeted by people on the left who feel they cannot defeat us with reason and evidence. I pray you think about this. It is worth it. It's worth your time. It's worth your mental energy because it could be the future of these United States. And with that, I will wish you a very good day.